Mojo will perform a feat of prestidigitation.
All right, so that's the 1995 music video for the Marilyn Manson song Dope Hat. Now, this music video is actually a hot topic in the latest lawsuit against Manson. Now, this is the lawsuit that was filed recently by attorney Jeff Anderson on behalf of his client, Bianca Allaine. And I've already talked about her claims in the previous videos that I've done, so check those out if you haven't. And I think I've pretty much destroyed her credibility, not that it was that hard to do. But unfortunately, she's only half of the most recent lawsuit against Marilyn Manson. There's a whole other equally bullshitty part of this lawsuit that is consumed with analyzing Marilyn Manson, the artist. So looking at his early album titles and album covers and promotional materials for early concerts and promotional materials for his fan club, Satan's Bake Sale, and analyzing lyrics and analyzing jokes and all of these things, a number of the most incendiary and most controversial aspects of Marilyn Manson's persona, and particularly some of his early work when he was first breaking out into the scene in the early 90s, early and mid 90s. A number of these aspects are analyzed and criticized in the lawsuit. And the lawsuit makes a claim that these various controversial aspects of Marilyn Manson's early work were actually indications that Marilyn Manson was and is a pedophile. And I think that it's really almost similar to Pizzagate, the level of ridiculousness that you find in this lawsuit, where at certain times they're actually analyzing squiggles, like doodling, trying to see if it matches up roughly with a symbol in the pedophile world. And I'm going to get into this in a moment, talk about it, but I'm just saying this is the level of ridiculousness that we're looking at. And it's not like the attorney, it's not like Jeff Anderson or whoever he had write this for him. It's not like this person's a dumbass, right? They're writing this because they know that for most people, and for your average, dumb public, and certainly the media, that the public and the media, they're going to read all of these bad things about his art. Oh, he titled his album that? Oh, he made that joke. Oh, that lyric, right? And that most people are going to see this and hear this and just be like, oh, yeah, just yuck, right? Because that's the level at which most people, and especially in the media, are thinking these days. Look at all these people freaking out because Leonardo DiCaprio is being Leonardo DiCaprio. And they're like, ew, it's icky. It grosses me out. Right? As if whether something is icky or it grosses someone out, whether someone has some kind of a visceral reaction to it, is like the final arbiter of whether it's right or wrong or whatever. And I think that what they're trying to do in this lawsuit, and Jeff Anderson is very shrewd because he knows that that because Marilyn Manson is such a controversial and incendiary artist, and over the years has done and said and written a lot of controversial stuff, that if he takes out of context, completely out of context, if he cherry picks some things here and there, then people's eyes will just kind of glaze over and they'll be like, well, yeah, of course he's guilty. Of course he's gross. Of course. Those lyrics are gross. That album cover's gross, right? That joke is gross. So like this music video, Dope Hat, this is the claim in the lawsuit. I'm reading from the lawsuit, section 19. The video for the song Dope Hat was featured on MTV and includes defendant Warner as a Willy Wonka character performing alongside children while exposing them to psychedelic scenes of violence and sex. Now, this is the video that you just watched. And what they're trying to promote here is the idea that this music video is actually celebrating pedophilia, and that children are actually being exposed to violence and sex, right? It sounds like the way that it's worded then is that these children are having to watch violence and sex. It sounds horrible, right? It sounds horrible to me. Well, it's also preposterous when you actually look at the music video Obviously it's meant to be psychedelic and weird and disturbing. I grant you that. Yes, it's trying to be disturbing in all kinds of ways. There's all kinds of weird stuff going on, right? I mean, I see looks like a dwarf in this. I mean, you could make the claim that he's targeting dwarves, or is he in favor of harm against dwarves? Because look what's happening to this dwarf in this thing. You could say the same thing with the cats, right? Well, oh God, is he killing kittens? We do know he's a cat aficionado. But this lawsuit just chooses to focus on the children, and then it makes it sound like the children are being exposed to horrible things and whatever. In fact, what's really going on is that the children, they're actors, of course, and their images have been superimposed onto this film, this video, right? There's a lot of stuff that's all jumbled together and superimposed, right? Like for instance, the cats at the beginning, right? Those cats are not actually there. They're not actually being exposed to sex or violence. This is the kind of bullshit that we're dealing with. Also, I want to point out that the Willy Wonka theme in this video is nothing suspicious or nefarious. In fact, as with all of Marilyn Manson's music and videos, there's a deeper meaning to it. You can see that in this quote here. Anyway, the assertions that they make, the connections that they make are just utterly ridiculous. One example is that, and Anderson and Advocates actually posted this on their Twitter or their Instagram, but this is in the lawsuit as well. We proudly stand with this courageous survivor, talking about Bianca Allaine, who in this complaint exposes Brian Warner as a self-proclaimed, quote, rape machine predator, etc., etc. Now, the way that the lawyer is presenting that in this social media post and also in the lawsuit, if you read it, is as if Marilyn Manson called himself a rape machine. What's important to understand is he wasn't even joking about himself. They have completely decontextualized and intentionally misread where this came from, this term rape machine, and that in fact it was not anything that Marilyn Manson or Brian Warner called himself. Let's see the origin of this term rape machine. Marilyn Manson Uncanceled has pointed this out. The term rape machine comes from lyrics to a Gary Newman song which Marilyn Manson covered and is about a fear of technology. And so if you look, and this is where the rape machine thing was found, it's on the album credits. If you look, it says Reverend Mr. Manson. Now, fire rape machine. Now, in and of itself, out of context, you think, well, what is that? What is it referring to? But if you look at the album credits, what you see is that next to, okay, you've got all of these band members' names in the underlined brown, right? And then in the black type, what you see is different instruments. So Daisy Berkowitz playing metal, Madonna Wayne Gacy playing super heterodyning synthetic bassoon. I have no idea. Twiggy, Moog bass, Ferg bass, etc., etc. Now look, there's Reverend M. Manson. There's Marilyn Manson, right? He plays fire and he plays rape machine. Rape machine in this context, it refers to an instrument. And why is it called? Why are they calling it the rape machine? I believe it's drums. Why are they calling it the rape machine? It refers back to this Gary Newman song about a fear of technology, right? Technology, drums are technology, right? It's not, no one, in no way is Manson referring to himself as rape machine here. And so that's just blatantly and obviously misleading. What you see in this lawsuit is that they keep taking all of these little things that in and of themselves should not be a big deal and stringing them together. Although they do go out on a couple of really bizarre Pizzagate limbs at certain times, and I want to talk about that. All right, so let's look at this lawsuit. Let's get into this. In Section 17, it says Defendant Warner described his working relationship with Defendant Nothing Records and its founder, Trent Reznor, as beginning in the early 1990s at the infamous Hollywood Hills home where Charles Manson's disciples murdered pregnant movie star Sharon Tate. Now, of course, the Tate murders have absolutely no bearing on anything discussed in the lawsuit, but they're going to use every opportunity they can get to make it seem like Manson is some kind of demented freak, and by extension, Trent Reznor as well. And then it says, in 1993, defendants produced Portrait of an American Family, the first Marilyn Manson release on Defendant Interscope and Defendant Nothing Records, an album that has sold millions of copies to date. The album was recorded in various studios across the country, including Reznor's studio inside the Tate murder house. Ooh, you got to get that in again, please. Can we get one more mention of the Tate murder house?
Where the Sharon Tate murders actually took place. A pinnacle place in the whole Manson murder story.
Songs on the album use child themes and refer to rape and sodomy. All right. You know how, see how they try to tie that together, child themes and then rape and sodomy, to make it sound like the album discusses child abuse. In fact, these things are separate. Yes, there are references to rape and sodomy, and then there are references to child themes. Do you see how vague that is? One song borrows lyrics written by Charles Manson. Ooh.
Where the Sharon Tate murders actually took place.
In fact, Manson has talked about these themes before in interviews. So, for instance, in one interview, he said, "A lot of the times the people who have a knee-jerk reaction are not only playing into my trap, but are also missing the point that I was making in the first place. A lot of the references on Smells Like Children on that album were about my own childhood and about views on use and abuse. Those were missed by them because they interpret them on a base level and actually on more of a pornographic level than they were intended to be interpreted." And speaking of the family themes, okay, this was a big thing, like I said, in the 90s, there was a real sort of hyperventilation about whether or not kids and teenagers were being exposed to material that was too controversial, or even that was satanic, or was causing them to have sex or whatever, right? I mean, people have thought some of this stuff going back to Elvis. And so Manson puts out this album, Portrait of the American Family, and this is how he explains it. He says, "This goes back to my feelings that the American family has become a very masochistic structure in which kids are constantly made to feel shitty for who they are. If they don't conform to conservative America's fascist agenda, they're made to feel guilty for it. That guilt is what spawns America's serial killers and teen suicides." So there's a whole point that he was trying to make. And, let's just be honest about the fact that not only was there a whole set of points he was trying to make with all this stuff as an artist, but also he was trying to break into the industry. He had to get noticed, and it was a particularly edgy time in the music industry. And so these things are understandable within context. Taken out of context and then distorted as they are in this lawsuit, that's a different story. All right, and then it says, below are 2 examples of flyers distributed by defendants promoting Defendant Warner and his band in 1994. This is when he was just getting started, hadn't become really famous yet. One flyer includes 2 small, completely naked children, again with pigtails and immature physical characteristics, alongside drug paraphernalia and references to Satan and pedophilia. For example, the spiral symbol on the bottom left of the flyer below and next to the top hat in the flyer above is consistent with what the FBI has identified as symbols and logos used by pedophiles to identify sexual preferences, referencing a little boy lover. So understand here, flyer, a handout for one of Marilyn Manson's earliest concerts when he was just trying to break into the industry, before he was really famous or successful or anything, right? I see the needle there. I see the reference to drug use. I see kids and the hallelujah motherfuckers and all of that. Like, I see all right. And again, it was an edgy time, and anybody who saw this, nobody would have taken this seriously, particularly the audience that it was intended for. But they're trying to say, like some kind of insane Pizzagate delusion, that these little doodles here, these little squiggles, that's actually the symbol for little boy lover, the pedophilic symbol. This is like international code for pedophiles, right? Well, there's a couple of problems with that. First of all, the symbol is not the same, all right? It's a bit of a stretch to say that that's the same symbol. And secondly, as it turns out, these symbols had not been created yet. So they cite this FBI paper, Symbols and Logos Used by Pedophiles to Identify Sexual Preferences. Well, when you scroll down, you see that came out in 2007. And when you actually do the research, what you find is that these symbols were not around and were not recognized and had not been created yet. These didn't even come about until the early 2000s. So in 1994, this stupid spiral would have had absolutely no significance. Absolutely none. So this is just completely idiotic. Anything that they say in this lawsuit about this pedophile code and these symbols, it's completely irrelevant because the symbols had not been created yet and not been associated with this stuff. So it's completely bonkers what they're saying. Look, I see the flyer. I get that there are elements of it that are disturbing. For the 90s and remembering what flyers for edgy bands typically looked like, I've seen crazier stuff. Or if this is the reason for someone being sued into oblivion, being canceled, destroyed, whatever, a stupid flyer when he was trying to break into the industry in the early 90s when people understood, anybody with a brain and a pulse understood that this was a bullshit ploy for attention or some kind of artistic statement. Give me a break. You know, if Marilyn Manson was really doing terrible shit, then why is it that there was never a successful criminal investigation of him? No criminal indictments. You're telling me he's just been running around in plain sight doing all this stuff and using pedophile codes and all of this and abusing people, and the police have never done anything? They've seen his devices too. They've seen all of his devices. They've seen everything in his computer and hard drives and phones and all of that. They know that this is bullshit. All right. It says, defendants often incorporated such pedophilia symbols in their promotional materials. The above referenced spiral logo is incorporated into the lettering on the album artwork for the Smells Like Children album. Similarly, other symbols associated with pedophilia are visible on defendant Warner's body while he performs. Oh, this is so ridiculous, as shown below. All right. Look at these two symbols. Again, these two symbols did not exist and were not understood as pedophilic at the time when the Smells Like Children album came out. And now this heart, look at this. It's not even, first of all, it's not even the same symbol. All right. It looks nothing like this other heart logo. And then also, as it turns out, this heart was actually taken from the Peter Lorre film Mad Love. You see, look, there it is. There's a spiral, which is a favorite movie of Manson's, and one that has special resonance and significance for him in relation to some of the romantic relationships that he's had. So it's actually a kind of a romantic and a cinematic symbol. And you can see how he incorporates it into some of his art. You can see on the sunglasses there. You can see here he is on stage. So give me a fucking break, people. Give me a fucking break. How ridiculous. And that is indicative of the rest of this lawsuit. So my point is that the edginess of some 90s music, and a lot of this is from memory as well, because I lived through this. And like, you don't understand, and so this idea of controversy, of being edgy, of having your album titled Smells Like Children, not because you're an actual pedophile or you're in any way encouraging pedophilia, but because at that point in time, people would totally get the joke and they would know that what you're doing is giving a finger to the conservative people who are trying to shove censorship down people's throats. And I have to say too that young people had much more of an appreciation for being rebellious back then. So people have to understand that one of the ways in which youth in many generations, right, going back to even Elvis, but one of the ways in which people in the 90s youth were rebelling is by listening to and celebrating music that they knew drove their parents nuts, right? And so, and look, I was a good, wholesome Southern Baptist girl from East Texas. And so if I'm plugged into these things, then I can guarantee you that normal, non-indoctrinated teenagers were very plugged into these things. But even someone like me, who was a good girl and who was not really plugged into this stuff, I still knew the thrill of going into a CD store and of looking at the different CD covers that had the parental advisory sticker for explicit content or explicit lyrics on it. And like that sticker was an indication that this was something you wanted to check out, right? If you were a young person. Whether you just wanted to look at the album cover and kind of gawk at it. And I mean, there were so many disturbing CD covers. That you have to understand too, right? You know, people are talking in this lawsuit. They're freaking out over a couple of the Marilyn Manson album covers. And they're from his early work when he's really trying to break through and be controversial, right? But I just have to say that there was a real thrill when you were a young person for looking at, you know, the crazy album covers, right? Or listening to the music, but there was a thrill in that parental advisory sticker. That's what you gravitated to. That was like a homing beacon. Seriously. And there were a number of different album covers that were CD covers that were offensive and that were notorious and that ruffled a lot of feathers and got a lot of media attention, right? You know, there was the Nirvana one with the naked baby on it. You know, I mean, and in fact, the guy who was that baby just sued. I think his case was dismissed, but he just recently sued for a bunch of money, claiming, of course, you know, just similar to some of these other lawsuits, these other entertainment lawsuits, claiming that he was victimized and blah, 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 even though he had been making money off of this for years. He would actually go to events and take pictures and stuff as the Nirvana baby and like go to like Nirvana reunions and festivals or, you know, whatever, right? So he, just like the Romeo and Juliet people, he was fine with it until suddenly there was this window of opportunity due to these batshit new laws in some of these states. There was this window of opportunity then for him to go in and make a money grab. But I'm saying you had the Nirvana album cover, right? If you're going to say Marilyn Manson, you know, pedophile based on his album cover, well, what about the Nirvana album cover? And so what I guess what I'm trying to say is being edgy, people would have understood when they saw Marilyn Manson, especially young people. People would have understood in the 90s when they saw Marilyn Manson album cover, Smells Like Children, or Portrait of an American Family, and weird pictures on it. People got the joke, particularly those that it was targeted toward young people, that audience. They got the joke. And it's just now we're in a different period in history where being truly edgy and being controversial, it's just not cool. And everybody's all afraid to offend people. And we are also, I think, more, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but we're more hypersensitive to any themes, shady themes involving children at all. And people have watched a lot of Law and Order, SVU over the years and whatever. And I'm just saying that, you know, some of the stuff that Marilyn Manson was doing to be edgy back in the early 90s. And you have to understand too, right, that he was trying to break out. He was trying to be noticed with those first couple of albums. And, you know, the reason why Trent Reznor picked him up out of obscurity and signed him, and the reason why Marilyn Manson's band exploded in popularity like it did was not because the music was great, although I think the music that I've heard, I think it is great and very talented and all that. But it was the shock value that really, I think, it seems, helped them to break through from what I've read and seen. And so you just, you know, again, like the things that you do to get noticed, the things, especially as an artist, as a performer, especially if you're understanding that other people are in on the joke, the things that you do to get noticed, to get signed, to get people talking about you, to get people watching your shows, they're not always things that make perfect total sense or seem hunky-dory out of that context, you know? And so that's what I'm trying to say. You have to understand the cultural moment. You have to understand the thinking at the time. And you have to understand what Marilyn Manson and other artists were reacting against. Watch parts 1 through 3 of this series linked below. The final part, part 5, comes out this week, so subscribe. And as always, videos like this that are complicated, they take a lot of time and effort to put together, and this one is definitely not going to be monetized by YouTube due to the controversial content. So your tips and donations are appreciated, and the links are below. Thank you.